We're doing climate wrong. We need to think in trillions, not millions. And I want to share with you what that means because it's not just about the money, it's about the approach. So, you've heard a lot about climate change, and for years now, we've been living with its specter and increasingly with its realities. But what if the reason you kept hearing about it isn't that we're not doing enough, but that we're doing it wrong? When I use the word climate today, I want to use it as an umbrella term for the things that we should really be focused on. For the loss of nature, for the pollution of our water, our air, our forests, for the pollution of our bodies with plastics and toxic substances. Because these are the things at risk: our water, our air, our bodies, the things that make this planet livable for us, the things that make Earth our home. I think sometimes when we think or talk about climate, we do so with the wrong impression, that somehow addressing this pollution crisis that threatens all of our home is something that we do as an act of charity, like something you do for polar bears or bees or trees, but that really is only part of the picture, because we aren't really in a race to save the planet. We're in a race to save ourselves. So picture this. Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old. That's 20,000 times older than the first humans. And in that time, Earth has seen all kinds of stuff. There was a time when this planet was covered in water. There were times when it was too hot or too cold to live in places. And when these things happened and human beings were around, most of us died. During one of those periods, about 75,000 years ago, because of environmental shifts much like the ones we're seeing today that led to drought and famine, about 90% of the human race was wiped out, leaving only 600 survivors, from which every single human being alive today is descended. And yet, the Earth made it through, and here she still is. So, in other words, it's quite likely that no matter what we do, the Earth will be okay. But if we continue to cause this damage to our bodies and our communities, then we, the people, will not be. And that brings us to our central problem. Our lives depend on an intricate web of natural systems, from the systems in our bodies to the systems of rain and wind and plants and animals and how they relate to each other. And these systems do something for us. They are a part of us, we are a part of them. They have value, and our pollution crisis threatens all of that value. And because it threatens all of that value, even banks, which are the institutions that were created to store value, are paying attention. So in 2017, Germany's chief financial authority found that if we continued on the path we were on in that year, then the damage from climate change would cost $550 trillion, which is literally more than all the money in the world. But we haven't continued at 2017 rates. We've gotten worse. And while we all know that, we're still operating at the completely wrong scale. The most recent estimate suggests we need to invest $4 to $8 trillion a year per year over the next 5 years to prevent this pollution crisis from reaching the worst point that it could for people. But in 2022, the total global investment into climate solutions was just 1% of global GDP. In other words, it could be argued that 99% of all activity in this system, on this planet, either ignores or worsens this crisis. So blaming a single country or a single industry or a single cheeseburger may feel good, but it won't solve the problem, because climate is not itself the problem. Climate is a symptom. The deeper problem is the system of industry that has been created over just a few hundred years and brought us this crisis, and in just that few hundred years is now destroying tens of thousands of years of harmony with the earth. The fact is, the systems we have were created by shifting trillions. Trillions in value out of the ground, trillions in value out of the water, trillions in value off of the backs of people. And then by dumping the harms of that shift back onto everyday people everywhere. A new system would require us to shift trillions in a different direction. By trying to invest in a little bit of technology here or a couple of regulations there, we take important steps, but we focus at the wrong scale. We need to focus at the scale of systems, because systems are the scale of everything, and because that's what systems change is, an investment. And the scale of systems is not millions, it's not billions, it is trillions. So how do we do that? Well, first, we engage from where the money sits. Individuals only have so much power over their environment, whether that's the materials that go into making our buildings or the supply chains that go into making our phones. But you know who has a much bigger say? The pension funds, the institutions, the banks that control as much as 80% of the world's assets. These organizations have enormous influence over how the world looks and feels simply because of where they put your money. And they do so without writing a single law or developing a single technology. And consider this, if you have a retirement plan, if you have a savings account, if you attend a college or university with an endowment, then technically these institutions work for you. They manage that money supposedly for your benefit. And so that's why engagement is the first step. In my own work, we've engaged with some of the largest financial institutions in the world to influence over $7 trillion worth of capital. The shifts from something like that are systemic in ways that are hard to quantify, but we need these shifts at a global scale because that is the power of engaging the money. So engage the institutions that store value on your behalf. Ask them where the money is going, and use your platform or your dollars to support the organizations that do that at scale. Second, we have to recognize that how is really a question of who. Whose ideas we center, who we invest with, whose solutions we prioritize. Because a lot of the same communities we know face the worst of this crisis also have generational solutions that could benefit everyone, but have largely been ignored by the people making decisions about our global systems. So for example, we know that forests are one of the most important resources we have, right? They regulate our planet, they protect our health, and they're under threat. But several studies have now found that investing in indigenous communities is the single most effective way to protect forests, even more than just leaving the forests alone. The same goes for biodiversity, and the question becomes why? Well, one of the reasons is because indigenous approaches to conservation were found to be more effective than other methods. But indigenous-led projects only see a very small fraction of global climate investments. This isn't just about inclusion. That's a really important point. This is actually slowing us down. We need to invest more heavily and more directly into indigenous communities and projects because doing so protects the pillars of life on this planet. We need to support initiatives like the Rising Voices Center that bring together indigenous knowledge and cutting-edge research in order to address this crisis holistically. Which brings us to the final point. We must understand that how is also a question of how quickly, and we move quickest if we invest in the right approach. Let's take an example that addresses an industry that touches it all, agriculture. Today, industrialized food production takes up half of the livable land on Earth. It often uses pesticides that can be harmful to our health, and it tears down those forests that we want to protect. But some communities in Africa and the Caribbean, as well as a movement of historically Black farms right here in North America, have long embraced traditional practices, combining crops, livestock, trees, and other sustainable practices in ways that regenerate the land, protect the water, and sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Groups like Rural Beacon Initiative work with transformative farms like these to potentially drive really huge impact. And the important point here is that these two are technologies. These are natural systems-based technologies that live with these communities and have been neglected for years in favor of industrial-scale farming that actually feeds a minority of the world's population. And so these things have the potential to transform our food systems and our lives. If scaled globally, these practices together could help get rid of half of the world's excess carbon without a single machine. So these are examples that offer us something crucial: a holistic approach to addressing our broken systems. And that's why my own work is so focused on these areas. It's why I'd encourage you to focus more of your work, your research, your time, your learning, your dollars on them. Because solving this crisis is not only a question of technology or policy, it is a question of approach. And where the money sits, whose ideas we center, and which approaches we invest in are not pieces of the puzzle. They are central to our efforts towards transformation. And more than resilience, more than conservation, more than mitigation, we need transformation. Because without transformation, without addressing the systems that are wrong and moving towards new ones, then new technologies and new standards will just continue to create new problems. So let's change the approach. Let's not think in millions or billions. Let's do this at the scale of trillions. Thank you.